So another update here on the Tamiya Dynastorm project. I did go ahead and install the 3D printed gearbox. This, I looked it up. It's from Wrench Dog. You can find him on Facebook, I believe. And the point of this 3D printed gearbox, again, is to allow you to run a more modern ball diff. Because on the stock gearbox, okay, you have to run the stock ball diff because of the bearing housings being of a particular size. And because you have to run the stock ball diff, that means you have to run the stock diff out drives with splines in them, and when those wear out, you're screwed. Now, one advantage I should point out with the stock gearbox is that it does spin much more freely than this gearbox here. I am hoping, and by the way, this is with all of the it's kind of funny business I did with the bearing housing on the side over here for the input shaft or the top shaft to try to get it to mesh a bit more freely with the idler gear. It still is a little bit bindy, so I'm hoping that with some break-in time that problem will be resolved. It still runs. You know, I did just like a 1 minute or 2 minute test run just with the pinion on here, just to spin it up to see if it spins okay. It does spin okay, but it doesn't spin as freely as this, at least not yet. But the main reason I did that is so that I wouldn't have to worry about these out drives, and also, even though I cut these so that I can put pucks style dog bones into them to prevent the out drives from wearing too much, it does kill the pucks. So I figured, okay, I'll put this aside and have it as a spare. Now, that being said, when I installed this gearbox with the components that I used, it did require me to change quite a bit on the dog bone and rear hub carrier side, and I think in a good way. So that's another reason why I want to stick with it. So what did I do originally? Well, when I had the stock gearbox, I used these Kyosho 64mm dog bones with the rear hub carrier mounted on this location here, so the outer lower hole. Okay, there was another hole over here that's available, but I had to cut that plastic off because when you mount here, this excess amount of plastic hits the inside of this arm here, so you have to cut it for clearance. So I was running it like that, and you know, of course, if this breaks, because this is cheap, crappy plastic, then you have to get a whole nother one and cut it again. It's kind of a pain. So that's another reason why I'd like to avoid this. So I got these nice aluminum ones from Extra Speed, and I was worried that I would have to cut these with a Dremel. I actually mentioned that in the last video, but apparently I don't have to, because I can mount this hub carrier with the, or I have to mount it actually with the inside hole, and I'll explain. So that all goes back to the diff. The diff I'm using here is from the Kyosho RB6, RT6 era ball diff, and I added the RB7SS diff out drives, which allow me to fit pucks to them. Right, it's a puck style diff out drive. Now the thing is, those out drives are not super long. They're a standard width, if you will, for an out drive. But for the Dynastorm, these out drives are actually extra wide. And so in order for a dog bone to mate to the very outer tip here, the dog bone doesn't have to be quite as long. With these more modern diffs, or at least with this Kyosho diff I have, the outer surface of this diff out drive is pushed in a bit. So in order to actually get the dog bone to not pop out, I need a longer dog bone. So instead of using the 64mm dog bone, I went to a Kyosho 73mm dog bone, and using that while also mounting this hub carrier on the innermost hole, that gave me the right total length, if you will, from where this dog bone mounts on the inside here to where it hits the diff out drive over here. But it's also, it's not quite that simple either, because for the actual hub carrier, normally you mount two bearings in here. And for this Tamiya Dynastorm, this would be a 5x11 bearing over here and another 5x11 bearing on the inside here. If I do that, then this dog bone ends up pushing a little too far in, and that would require me to use a different sized wheel axle. This particular wheel axle here that I have is the 3-stripe version. I keep forgetting the part number for that. Hold on a second. It comes from, well, no, that's for the 73mm thing. Never mind. So this is the 3-stripe version of the Kyosho wheel axle, which is the longest version. Now with that, I would have a 2mm axle spacer on the inside here with this dog bone, and if I have the spacer on the inside here with a 5x11 bearing on the inside, this gets pushed too far in. If I take that 2mm wheel axle spacer out, this pushes out a bit, but then the drive pin here also gets pushed out, and I don't have enough, I can't actually mate the dog bone to the diff out drive very effectively. So, okay, maybe I can get like a 1mm axle spacer and play games, but then still this axle pin is too far out. So what I ended up doing is, instead of having this 5x11 bearing here, I still have one on the outside. On the inside, I do two things. First, I use a 6x11 bearing, which is a little bit narrower, and it's really used as kind of an offset spacer. So the fact that the 6x11 bearing is a little bit narrower than the 5x11 bearing, that with the 2mm axle spacer on the inside here gives me the perfect spacing so that the drive pin hole here is exactly aligned with the outside of the outer bearing. In addition to that, I also have good mating between the pucks and the diff out drive on this side. Now, because it's a 6x11 bearing, it's going to be too large for the inner diameter compared to the wheel axle, which is 5mm. So in between that 6x11 bearing and this 5x11 here, on the inside, I put a 5x8 bearing, and it fits perfectly in this housing here. So it's 5x11, 5x8, 6x11, 2mm axle spacer, 73mm dog bone. Assuming you're using the Kyosho ball diff here. Then on the outside here, you get your drive pin, your hex, and everything mounts on just fine. So this works. And as a result of that, I have to make the camber link a little bit longer, which, okay, is going to reduce my camber gain, which, in terms of handling, maybe it won't handle quite as sharply on corner entry. So we'll see how it actually does on turf. But at least as far as... I still think this is a net win, by the way, because I have a ball diff that's more robust. I have a rear hub carrier that's more robust compared to the plastic part. I have a nice aluminum part here. I also have the a better slipper clutch arrangement here. With the way I did it here with the stock input shaft, it was really, I had to really crank down on this to keep the slipper from slipping because of the way this whole thing was set up. This is more conventional, if you will. So I should have a much larger tuning window here for this slipper clutch. So overall a net win. But again, though, it's going to take probably some break-in for the gears to achieve a reasonable mesh, especially between the gear on the input shaft and the idler gear. We'll see how that wears in over time. But yeah, that's the main update here. I was just playing around with trying to install this and modernize it a bit more. And you know, it's going to take a little bit more tuning and everything, but that's it in terms of modernization of this buggy, I believe. So yeah, thanks for watching.